I'm Phyllis Carter, 60 years old. And 3 days ago, a hurricane ripped through Florida and left my small house in Clearwater as nothing more than broken wood and wet memories. When the storm cleared, I had no roof, no walls, and nowhere to sleep. With my clothes damp and my hands shaking from exhaustion, I drove to my daughter's home. Her name is Brooke Carter Hale. She lives in a gated community, the kind where every driveway shines and every lawn looks staged for a magazine. I thought I could count on her. I thought a daughter would open her door to her mother after disaster. But when she appeared in her silk blouse, her hair perfectly arranged, she didn't look at me as family. She looked at me as a problem. She said her husband, Travis Hale, didn't want an old pauper in his house. Those words, sharp as glass, landed harder than the storm itself. Neighbors paused in their yards to watch me stand there, drenched and humiliated. My own daughter told me to leave. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply smiled, because I finally understood who she had become. Then I reached for my phone. Minutes later, a black Mercedes rolled into the driveway, stopping in front of her perfect white steps. The driver's door opened and my husband, Graham Ellison, stepped out. He walked past Brooke without hesitation, pulled me close, and said 3 words that froze everyone on that porch. My wife stays. Graham Ellison stood tall on the porch, his presence heavier than the rain-soaked silence still clinging to my clothes. Brooke's eyes flicked from me to him, unsettled, as if she wasn't sure which part of her life had just collided. Travis Hale stepped into view behind her, his jaw tight, his polished confidence suddenly cracking under the weight of a stranger who didn't hesitate to claim me. Graham slipped a checkbook from his jacket with the calm precision of a man who never needed to raise his voice. He asked what would be fair compensation for hosting me for a week. He wrote quickly, tore the page free, and held out a check for $10,000. His tone was even, but every word was a blade. If sheltering family was such a burden, he said, then here was the market price for food, utilities, and the so-called inconvenience. Brooke froze, her manicured hand hovering but never reaching for the paper. Neighbors lingered by their hedges, pretending to prune roses while their phones caught every second. Travis swallowed hard, his eyes locked on the number, as though temptation might undo him right there. The air felt charged. A public stage where appearances mattered more than compassion. I let the silence stretch before speaking. I told them I wouldn't stay under a roof where I had been called a burden. Money could buy a room, but it could not buy dignity. Graham slipped the check back into his pocket without breaking eye contact with Travis. And then he turned to me. He said the Ritz-Carlton was waiting, and that I deserved nothing less. I nodded, and for the first time since the hurricane, I felt the ground under my feet steady again. The suite at the Ritz-Carlton was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned after too many nights of storms and slammed doors. Graham Ellison moved with steady purpose, already on the phone with insurance adjusters and contractors, his voice carrying the authority of someone who never wasted time. I sat in a robe, the weight of exhaustion finally lifting as I looked out across Tampa Bay. For the first time since the hurricane, I wasn't wondering where I would sleep. The calm didn't last long. My phone rang, and Brooke Carter Hale's name lit the screen. I almost let it go unanswered. But curiosity won. Her voice trembled as she asked why I hadn't told her I was married, why I had hidden an entire life from her. I reminded her gently that for years she hadn't asked. She wanted updates about houses, clothes, her next deal, but never once about whether I was lonely or happy. On the other end, Brooke stammered, searching for excuses. She mentioned being busy, protecting her marriage to Travis Hale, keeping up appearances. I cut through her words, telling her she had made a choice the moment she called her own mother an old pauper on her porch. Silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. I told her if she wanted to see me, she could come tomorrow. Not to defend herself, but to listen. When I hung up, the water outside glimmered against the glass. Graham stepped in from the adjoining room, his eyes soft when they found mine. I realized then that storms come in more than one form. But so does shelter. When I arrived at Brooke Carter-Hale's house the next afternoon, the perfect picture I had always known was already starting to unravel. The lawn hadn't been cut. Newspapers piled at the edge of the driveway. And the once pristine facade carried a heaviness it never used to. Brooke opened the door without her polished mask. Her hair was tied back roughly, and the shine of control had slipped from her face. Inside, I noticed gaps where expensive staging pieces had once filled the rooms. The crystal vase that used to dominate the mantel was gone. The silver frames, the glossy art her husband bragged about all missing. On the coffee table sat a folder, thick with unopened envelopes. Brooke slid it toward me with hands that trembled. Inside were late notices, tax warnings, and maxed-out credit card statements. Numbers bled across the pages like bruises. Their image of success, the one Travis Hale had so proudly flaunted, was nothing more than a house built on borrowed money. He had taken risks flipping properties too big to handle, covering one failure with another loan, until the entire structure of their finances started to collapse. Brooke's voice cracked as she admitted she hadn't known how deep the hole had become until she found the hidden papers in Travis's office. She tried to speak of pressure, of keeping up appearances, but the excuses sounded hollow even to her own ears. I listened without judgment, though the irony pressed hard against my chest. Just 2 weeks earlier, she had stood on this very porch, dismissing me as an old pauper. Now she was standing in the ruins of her own carefully staged life. Graham Ellison studied the folder with a steady eye, then closed it with the same deliberate calm he carried everywhere. He didn't waste time with sympathy. He spoke of immediate steps, financial counsel, restructuring, cutting losses before the debt swallowed them whole. His words landed like instructions, not suggestions. And even Brooke Carter-Hale seemed to realize she was no longer in control of her own stage. I turned to my daughter, not as a victim begging for space, but as a woman who had earned the right to be heard. I told her there were 3 conditions if she wanted me to consider standing beside her now. She would acknowledge what she had done, apologize for the humiliation on her porch, and end the cycle of pretending that appearances mattered more than truth. The room hung heavy with silence. Brooke's eyes filled. But I didn't soften. Emotion had carried me long enough, and it had cost me more than I could measure. What mattered now was principle, not pity. I reminded her that families survive on honesty, not staged perfection, and that without it, even the strongest house will collapse. She nodded slowly, as though realizing that dignity wasn't negotiable. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one cornered. I was the one drawing the lines. Graham Ellison didn't linger on pity. He leaned forward, his tone measured, and offered Travis Hale something neither of us expected. He said Ellison Response and Resorts had a new division for affordable coastal housing, a project meant to rebuild communities without the false shine of luxury staging. He needed a project manager, someone who understood construction, deadlines, and the real cost of failure. The offer was clear, but so were the conditions. This wasn't a glamorous contract or a chance to flip houses for quick profit. It was steady work with strict oversight, a fixed salary, and regular audits. No borrowed money, no secret investors, no staged illusions. Graham laid out expectations like a blueprint: meet the deadlines, respect the budget, and accept accountability. Every report would be reviewed, every expense justified. Travis shifted in his chair, his pride cracking under the weight of responsibility. For years, he had thrived on risk and applause, never on restraint. Now the choice stood plain in front of him. Either he humbled himself and proved he could build with integrity, or he would lose the last chance handed to him. Brooke sat silently beside him, her fingers tight around the edge of her chair. She understood what the offer meant. This wasn't charity. It was a test. Graham wasn't handing them a lifeline without rules. He was drawing a line between those who built real homes and those who built illusions. Travis finally nodded, his voice low. He would take the job. Whether he could keep it was another matter entirely. Brooke Carter Hale knew words alone would never erase the sting of what she had done on her porch. So she chose the one stage she had left. The very platform she had once used to sell an image of perfection. In a short live stream from her rented apartment, she looked directly into the camera without makeup, without filters, and admitted the truth. She said the phrase she had thrown at me, calling me an old pauper, was the most shameful thing she had ever spoken. Her voice trembled but did not break. She told her audience that appearances had blinded her, that she had valued staged homes and polished surfaces over the mother who had built her entire life on sacrifice. She admitted she had failed me, not because of money, but because of pride. Thousands of people watched in real time, many leaving comments, some praising her honesty, others questioning if it was too late. I watched quietly, my arms folded. I didn't cry, and I didn't smile. When the stream ended, Brooke turned toward me, eyes red, waiting for absolution. I told her respect wasn't measured by a public broadcast. It was measured by how she treated me when no one was watching. Her shoulders sagged, but she nodded. The apology was a start, but only a start. Real repair would come through action, not words. I knew apologies were only the first step. Real change required structure, and structure demanded boundaries. That is why I sat across from Brooke Carter Hale at the dining table and laid out the plans I had finalized with Graham Ellison. There would be a scholarship fund created in my name, one dedicated to single mothers returning to school. It would ensure that women who carried burdens like mine once had would find doors open instead of slammed shut. But for Brooke, the path would look different. A trust was being established, not as a blank check, but as a safety net. The rules were clear. It would only activate if she kept her credit clean, maintained steady work, and contributed at least 200 hours of verified community service. It would cover her in emergencies, but it would never enable her to slip back into a life of illusion. She sat stunned, torn between gratitude and frustration. I told her it was not punishment, but protection against the very patterns that had led her to call me a burden and to build her marriage on false foundations. If she wanted security, she would have to earn it the same way I had earned every step of my own survival. Her eyes filled, not with anger this time, but with something closer to humility. She understood this was not about money. It was about values. The trust was more than inheritance. It was a boundary carved in stone, and she would have to decide if she could live within it. The months that followed proved the difference between wealth built on illusion and wealth grounded in truth. Graham Ellison's affordable housing project moved forward, and Travis Hale reported each week with progress updates that were scrutinized line by line. Gone were the quick flips and borrowed money. Instead, he wore a hard hat, managed crews, and earned his paycheck under the weight of accountability. The shine of television spots and flashy showings was replaced with the grit of concrete and schedules. And for the first time, he seemed to grasp what honest work required. Brooke Carter Hale shifted too. Without the trappings of luxury staging, she rebuilt her career by selling homes that families could actually afford. She traded glossy social media posts for open houses, where she spoke about stability and practical choices. The more she let go of image, the more she gained a sense of real purpose. Slowly, she began to show me that her apology had not been empty. For me, watching these changes was less about satisfaction and more about quiet proof. It showed that principles, when enforced, could redirect even the most stubborn pride. I hadn't rescued them with wealth. I had forced them to confront reality and given them a chance to stand or fall on their own. That, I realized, was the truest form of repayment. Brooke Carter Hale invited me to dinner at the small apartment she now shared with Travis Hale. The meal was simple. Nothing like the catered spreads she once flaunted. But the effort was real. She placed a bowl of stew on the table with hands that no longer shook from pride, only from the weight of humility. When we sat, she looked directly at me and thanked me not for money, not for saving her lifestyle, but for giving her the chance to rebuild herself. Her voice steadied as she admitted she had treated me as an embarrassment for years. Yet I had remained her mother. She asked if I would allow her back into my life, not as the perfect daughter she once pretended to be, but as the daughter who finally understood respect. I listened carefully. Then I told her I wasn't asking for perfection. I didn't need expensive meals or staged rooms. I needed her to remember that family is proven in moments when no one is watching. If she wanted my trust, she would need to show it every day. In small choices, not in grand gestures. Brooke nodded, tears tracing her face. But there was no drama in it, just truth. For the first time in years, I saw the daughter I thought I had lost. The morning light in Sarasota spilled across the kitchen of the new home Graham Ellison and I had built together. Papers for the scholarship fund were signed. The trust for Brooke Carter Hale was finalized. And for the first time in decades, I felt the weight of the past loosen. Graham poured coffee and smiled at me, reminding me that freedom isn't about wealth alone. It is about boundaries that protect what matters. Across town, Brooke finished her hours of community service, slowly rebuilding her credibility. She no longer staged perfection for strangers online. Instead, she learned the value of real transactions, helping families find modest homes they could truly afford. Each small step was proof that her apology was more than performance. Travis Hale remained on the construction sites, his boots caked with dust. He was no longer flipping houses with borrowed money. He was earning wages under oversight, and the discipline showed in his posture. He had been humbled, but humility was the only way forward. Whether he rose higher would depend on how well he honored the structure, Graham demanded. The neighbors who once filmed my humiliation had moved on, but their recordings lingered online as a lesson. They captured the day my daughter chose appearances over compassion, and the day my husband answered with 3 words that changed everything. I looked out over the water and felt no bitterness. My story had reached its balance. Money can build walls, but dignity builds a home. And in that truth, every account had been settled. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.